I work for Mid North Coast Local Health District Health Promotion Department, and I'm really excited to be here today to give a little bit of an overview and give you guys some context as to how this webinar series came about. Before I get started, though, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the lands on which we meet, and Birrapah country. Pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. So I'll just share my screen here. Great. So can you see that one? Perfect. So as I said, I'm just going to give you guys a little overview and context of how the webinar series came about. So over the last 6 months, Health Promotion has been collaborating with a range of partners across the district to create a webinar series for NGO family caseworkers. And you can see here that the collaboration between partners has been across Health Promotion, Blue Sky Community Services, Departments of Communities and Justice, Child Protection and Counselling Services, Maternity Services, and Trucillion. And so this has originally originated from Strategic Priority 2.6 in the Mid North Coast Child Obesity Prevention and Management Action Plan. And this strategic priority is focusing on building capacity and awareness of DCJ caseworkers to embed prevention into their work when they're working with families. And then a year later, the first 2000 days framework was released. So it was a really nice link between the Mid North Coast Child Obesity Action Plan and the first 2000 days framework. And so then what we did was we teamed with Blue Sky to broadcast this webinar series to enable further reach to not only DCJ caseworkers, but also NGO caseworkers across the Mid North Coast. And so the aim of this 7-part webinar series is to educate NGO family caseworkers to provide support and referral pathways to families and young children who work with children within the first 2000 days of life. And so the health priorities that were chosen within the first 2000 days were these key priorities, which are antenatal care, early breastfeeding, child immunisation, smoking cessation support, sleep, baby and toddler behaviour, feeding and nutrition. And it's also important to note that we conducted a needs survey, which was distributed at the end of last year, just to get a bit of an understanding of, what key priorities and health concerns that you guys recognise when you're working with your families and children. And so you can see here, this is our timeline where we did the initial planning with partners and the needs assessment last year. And then after that, we've been planning the last 6 months with our partners. And you can see here the first session, which will be held by Jody Clayton, is just to give, a summary of why the first 2000 days is so pivotal to the development, of a child's health and well-being. You can see we've got antenatal care, which is in July, early breastfeeding, child immunisation and development checks, smoking and pregnancy, navigating early parenting, and the feeding and nutrition, which is in November. And so the objectives of this whole 7-part series is to increase your understanding and awareness of the importance of the first 2000 days, increase your knowledge of the health priorities listed, increase your confidence to engage in conversations about these health priorities, and also the confidence to refer to the right level of service at the right time. And then the last objective is to increase your awareness of the referral pathways in your local health district. So, that's something that, we found is really important is to know who to go to when you're working with your families and children when they're facing certain health concerns. And so I've just got here that, it's really important to fill out these surveys for us as it provides us, some feedback, and we're able to evaluate the sessions to improve for future and add any additional key priorities that you might find unnecessary when working with your families. So I'd just like to welcome Jody Clayton, and as I said, she'll be giving a really awesome introduction to the importance of the first 2,000 days, and how all these key priorities impact a child's health and development. So, thank you, and welcome, Jody.
Thanks, Tisha. Uh, Let me just share my screen with you guys. Okay. Let me know if you can't see that. Can you hear me and see my screen? Good.
Yep.
Okay. All right, I am going to attempt something a little bit ambitious today, which is really show you where I'm finding information, how to navigate through health screens, which worked very well for me when I don't have anyone watching. So hopefully it works when we're in the webinar as well. All right, so welcome to the first 2,000 Days webinar series. And as Tisha said, this is our first webinar. I'm Jody Clayton. I'm the Child Protection and Child Wellbeing Coordinator for the Mid North Coast Local Health District. And part of this role is to coordinate a district-wide approach to implement the New South Wales first 2,000 Days framework. So in our session today, we'll look at this framework more broadly and at the whole of New South Wales Government Initiative, which is Brighter Beginnings. Just a few house notes to get us started. It is a brave new world of online learning, so there might be some technical issues, but we'll do the best we can if there are. And we may not get everything right. So please let me know if you can't see on your screen what I'm talking about. Please let me know with your voice or in the chat box. And also if you can't see my screen or sorry, if you can't hear me, but I look like I'm talking, please also let me know. But as I mentioned earlier, one of the positives of the online learning environment is that as we go through today's session, I'll be able to show you where to find specific content. That way, if you see something useful, you'll be able to find it for yourself later on. If you do have questions throughout today's sessions, you're very welcome to add them into the chat box. If there's any that I can answer today, I'll do so at the end of the session. But highly likely there might be some that I can't answer today as it's an evolving and complex field. So I can definitely take down details and get back to people with some of those trickier questions. I'll also provide my contact details at the end of today's session. So if you walk away and think of a question or a comment or something we can work on together, you're very welcome to contact me. To improve sound quality throughout today's session, I'll ask everyone to keep yourself on mute unless you're speaking. If I see noise coming through, I might hit the mute everyone button, so you'll then need to unmute yourself to speak or ask a question. Oh, just as we said it. But most importantly, I do hope everyone enjoys the session and is able to take away something from it. So Tish did do an acknowledgement of country, but I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I'm speaking to you from today, which is the Gumbagnia people, to their elders past, present and emerging as well. As we come together in this meeting to talk about taking action within the first 2,000 days of life, it's important to acknowledge that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children are overrepresented in regards to specific vulnerabilities that we talk about through today. But this overrepresentation can't be understood without the recognition of the impacts of colonisation, its associated intergenerational trauma and its continuing impacts. Australia's Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander population has always been and continues to be incredibly resilient, and it's hoped that any initiatives on the Mid-North Coast provide a platform to support stronger measures to protect and maintain Aboriginal families, culture and heritage. Keeping in mind that today's Aboriginal children are tomorrow's elders, we all have a role in redesigning services and responses that are culturally safe to address the specific needs of children and families here on the Mid-North Coast. So your learning objectives for today's session, probably quite consistent with the learning objectives for the whole series. But hopefully after your session today, you will walk away with increased understanding of the first 2,000 days from conception to age 5 and actions that can be taken to improve long-term health outcomes, increased knowledge of the evidence that highlights the importance of the first 2,000 days for lifetime physical, social and emotional health, increase confidence to support families by engaging in conversations about the importance of the first 2,000 days, and increase confidence and knowledge to refer to local health services and programs. So thanks everyone for making the time to be with us here for this webinar. I'm hopeful that it's a valuable use of your time. And given everyone here is already working in this area, it's safe to say that you probably already know how important this time period is for social, emotional, physical, and intellectual development. But it is an exciting time to be in this field when you compare all of that on the ground knowledge and experience with current research, whole of government commitment, and cross-agency focus and prioritisation. So here you can see an overview of the Brighter Beginnings initiative. And I'll just show you basically for Brighter Beginnings. If you Google Brighter Beginnings, you can see the overview for the whole of government response. And there's some great information there to talk through what the whole of government is doing. So you can see there, our mission, we're supporting all children in New South Wales to have the best start in life. We want to build understanding of the importance of the first 2,000 days, which means providing families with information that they need when they need it to make their decisions. So a really customer-centric approach to empowering families with clear, reliable and timely information. Connecting services and supports are so important. So facilitating full participation in universal health, education and family services. We also want to provide easy access to timely information and services. So that sounds like quite an easy thing and probably something we should already be doing, but those of us who work in these areas know that we don't always talk the same language. We don't always make services as accessible for families that they could be. So we really want to improve existing services and deliver evidence-based supports for families with additional needs. So really where we see those additional needs, where we're creating clear pathways and breaking down barriers. So Brighter Beginnings website is a great website to have a look at, lots of different program links and information there. And what I'm about to do now is hand over to Dr. Elizabeth Murphy, who will tell us about the evidence that's the basis for the first 2,000 days health framework. So I'm going to attempt to play a video, which I'm sure will play without issue, but I'll just make sure all my sound and audio is ready to go. So this is via the first 2,000 days website on New South Wales Health. So if you're looking for information on first 2,000 days New South Wales Health response, you can just Google New South Wales Health. And one of two ways, you can either put in here 2,000 days, which will bring it straight up, or you can also navigate there from kids and families, or if I went programs, but obviously easiest way is to put in that search box, first 2,000 days. So please let me know if you can't hear Dr. Liz Murphy, but I will play her video now to provide us with that evidence overview that is the basis for the first 2,000 days health approach.
Hello, my name's Elizabeth Murphy. I'm the Senior Clinical Advisor for Child and Family Health at the Ministry of Health, and it's my pleasure to speak to you this morning about the importance of the first 2,000 days of life. Thank you for joining me for these 15 minutes, which could actually save lives. We all know about saving lives in the traditional way, ABC, airway, breathing and circulation. But now we know about the importance of a new ABC, one that is about the importance of the first 2,000 days of life. That period of time from conception to the age of 5, 2,000 days when 90% of the brain is developing. 2,000 days that has an impact on the next 30,000 days of life. So what is this new ABC? Well, we'll go through the evidence of each one of these aspects: antenatal care, brain development, childhood experience, and look at how that information has been supported by data and epigenetics. Beginning where it does in the antenatal period, we'll talk to three aspects. The first, physical health. We've long known the importance of the physical health of the mother on the physical health and development of that baby, particularly in the first trimester. Examples such as folate, a water-soluble nutrient, but in low levels prior to conception and in the first weeks of pregnancy, can have catastrophic consequences on that baby's spinal development, leading to spina bifida. Rubella, mild illness in the mother, fleeting rash, low-level temperature, but consequences of the baby affecting vision, hearing and intellectual development. And now, gestational diabetes, a modern problem, having that impact on impaired glucose tolerance on the future child. The physical health of the mum impacting on the baby, well understood. But now we have emerging evidence on the psychosocial health of that mother and father, we'll talk about later, impacting on that psychosocial health of the baby. The best study that we have is a cohort study from our own Western Australia called the RAIN study. 2,890 women followed up from their pregnancy in 89 and 90, and then what happened to those children as monitored by a child behaviour checklist. They documented during the pregnancy the kind of stressful events, the events that can happen as part of life, that happened to that mother, the timing, the type and the number of stressful events were documented. They then linked that to the child behaviour checklist and found that if that mother had suffered more than 5 stressful events in the pregnancy, then that child was manifesting abnormal results to a child behaviour checklist later on in their childhood. Now we know that pregnancy itself can have an impact on the psychosocial health of mums and dads. Anxiety and depression. We know that 1 in 10 mothers antenatally and 1 in 7 mothers postnatally, that's 15,000 women every year in New South Wales, can suffer from depression. There's also an impact on dads, 1 in 20 during the pregnancy and 1 in 10 postnatally. That depression and anxiety can have an impact on that future relationship with that child and the development that can happen in attachment behaviours. We also know from overseas studies where there is actually a pre-existing mental illness in the mother that the impact of that is going to be greater if the mother doesn't take the medication. So this is a study that linked the mother's depression to whether she took her antidepressants or not, compared with a group of women who didn't have depression. And you can see the most worrying result linked to a strengths and difficulties questionnaire done on that child at the age of 7 was for the mother who had depression and didn't take antidepressants. All of this adding to this picture that we have that the mental health, the psychosocial health of the mother is having an impact on the psychosocial health and development of that baby and ultimately the child and adult. And the third aspect of what we know is happening during that antenatal period is about that baby's lifelong disease and morbidity being set, what we now refer to as DOHAD, the developmental origins of health and disease. First considered as a hypothesis by Dr. Barker, who linked low birth weight to the potential of early onset of coronary artery disease. And as you can see from this graph, there was a link between low birth weight and coronary artery disease. So what's happening as that baby grows in the womb is setting up for life. We now move on to the second aspect of what we're talking about today, the brain and the brain development. An image of the night sky for a concept of neurons in a baby's brain at birth, all disparate, not connected. Over 1,000 trillion are going to be connected over the next years as a result of that baby's experience, as a result of the nurturing and the care that that baby is going to have from important carers, loving attachment in those first years of life. If you see in our head circumference chart in every personal health record, just look at how steep that curve is in that first year and years of life. And imagine that that is being forged by brain connections that are occurring as a result of the stimulation between a loving primary attachment figure and that baby. Indeed, we have PET scans that have demonstrated as you can see with that image of the brain with lots of darkness there, where there just isn't the brain architecture forged, where these babies in the Romanian orphanages suffered extreme neglect and there isn't the brain architecture compared with the other PET scan image of that healthy red lit up brain. And that's what we're looking for in the brain development of children. Indeed, another aspect that we understand more now is that we have critical window periods, and if you have a look at that graph, most of them are in the first 2,000 days of life. So that is where that child is going to be needing that stimulation for vision, hearing, communication, cognitive development, emotional development. And just look at how critical that window period is, how steep those graphs are, and how they begin to wane after the first 2,000 days of life. Indeed, we know now from a UK study that a developmental assessment at just 22 months is an accurate predictor of that child's educational outcomes at 26 years. 22 months predicting 26 years. And now we move on to childhood experience. I'm just going to talk about one study, a very pivotal study done by Vincent Folletti and linked with the CDC. Adult clinicians concerned about a group of patients that just didn't seem to get better compared with other groups of patients. And probing in their history found that this group was related to ones who had experienced adverse childhood experiences in their early years. And indeed, this led to them developing what's known as an ACE score out of 10. That score is gained 3 for the different types of abuse, physical, sexual or emotional, 2 for neglect, emotional or physical, and then 5 for what's happening in the family home, such as domestic violence, substance abuse, mental illness, parental separation or divorce, or incarceration. And tragically, if a child has a score of 6 or more, the prediction is that they will die 20 years earlier than a child who has a score of 0. We know the mechanism is toxic stress, stress not buffered by supportive adult relationships. And that leads to health risk behaviours or not. Even without that, we know that there is earlier onset of disease and ultimately earlier onset of death. We know that that affects the child when they are a child. That stressful environment will have an impact on their development. And as you can see by the other graph, it will also have an impact on their earlier onset of coronary artery disease. And indeed, the 6 major killers are all determined and influenced by adverse childhood experiences. And what of COVID? What will that have as an impact for us looking into the future? Will it be a negative or a positive force? This is something we need to monitor and look into very carefully. So the exciting thing is that the evidence has given us an understanding of the mechanism of the importance of the first 2,000 days. Another ABC, we understand the anatomy, the biology, the chemistry. We've got data linkage and epigenetic evidence. And if we understand the mechanism, we can understand the interventions. And the most important intervention is A, attachment. How are we going to ensure that every baby has that best positive attachment with a caregiving adult, in particular in those first 2,000 days? It's supported by other mechanisms where we work on brain plasticity, chemistry and resilience. We get the community to support and look at epigenetics for the positive. So this has all come together in our first 2,000 days framework. And we have 3 objectives that we hope will make a big difference to the outcome of our children. The first objective, and this is probably one of the most important of the 3, and that is that everybody understands, everybody has this health information of the importance of the first 2,000 days. Because if parents and caregivers understand the importance, then they're going to make choices that are informed choices about the importance. Indeed, tragically, what we understand now is the general public doesn't understand the importance of the first 2,000 days, or the importance of the role of adults in that child's life. Indeed, it's the opposite. They think the child is in a bubble, not influenced by what can happen around them by adults. Just imagine if adults don't think that domestic violence or the circumstances that baby is growing up in is actually having an impact on that baby, which we know now to be true. The other very concerning misunderstanding is that the general public doesn't think that you can influence a child's cognitive or emotional development until they start to speak. Just think back to those graphs. Think of how much was happening before that child begins to speak. Think about the evidence that at 22 months you can predict educational outcomes at 26 years. The earlier that we support babies from conception to the age of 5 is critical. This is evidence that we now have about every week counting to the pregnancy going to full term. And so we're not talking about clinical reasons where the baby needs to be delivered with the mum or the bub. We're talking about for no other than a social reason, people choose to have that baby delivered at 1, 2 or 3 weeks early. And if they do, for every week that is earlier than full term, that child has a greater risk of learning disorders. Indeed, in the last 5 weeks of pregnancy, a third of the weight of the brain is growing. So that's critical information that people need to understand. The second objective is about the importance of us providing care for everyone in our universal health system, and probably none more important than developmental surveillance, because indeed we know now in New South Wales that 1 in 5 children are arriving at school developmentally vulnerable on 1 or more domain, and 1 in 10 on 2 or more domains. And the why that's particularly important is that we know, because of linked data from the Australian Early Development Census to NAPLAN results, that those first 2,000 days, the way that child arrives prepared for school is actually going to determine their NAPLAN results. So the support that that child needs is before they arrive at school to be able to reach their maximum learning potential. And we have Learn the Signs Act early, which is a developmental surveillance tool that we hope is widespread and used more broadly. And then finally, our third objective, which is we need to provide more for those who need more. Those families where they aren't able to keep their children and the children go into out-of-home care. Those families where there is domestic violence, where there is concerns, even antenatally, we know that will have an impact on that baby. Those families where there is alcohol abuse during pregnancy. So tragically, we know that fetal alcohol spectrum disorder is the single largest cause of developmental disability in the Western world. It is more significant than autism, than cerebral palsy, than Down syndrome, than Tourette's altogether. And this cause of brain damage, developmental disability, is actually 100% preventable. And yet 1 in 2 women will drink in pregnancy and 1 in 4 will continue to drink when they know they're pregnant. So in conclusion, we've reviewed the evidence on this new ABC, the importance of antenatal care, brain development and childhood experience. Indeed, we know now how important the first 2,000 days of life are for life. We are now in a position to provide the best possible start to life for our children. Thank you.
All right, that was Dr. Liz Murphy. And just showing you that page. We can access that video at a later date to review the video there, or also the first 2,000 days framework and the statewide first 2,000 days implementation plan, if you would like more information about any of those. So in the video there was some discussion about, well, what are the key priorities for New South Wales? And you can find this in the 2,000 days framework on the website that I just showed there. So what we're doing in New South Wales is looking at some of that data that makes a difference to the development of children, some of those impacts within the first 2,000 days of life, and saying, well, where can we make a difference? Where are some of the things that we can work with other agencies or within health services to make a difference for kids? So stats on women consuming alcohol during pregnancy, or even having the information about alcohol consumption in pregnancy, because we know there's a lot out there about whether it's safe to have 1 drink, 2 drinks, or whether it's safe at all. And so some of that is finding out, well, what's the best evidence that we can provide to people, and how are we providing that information? Then how do we track that within our region, and how do we create initiatives that actually target things that make a difference? So some of those stats there: 1 in 5 of children starting their first year of school in New South Wales are developmentally vulnerable in 1 or more domains. So that's the AEDC data. And also some stats there about children being reported to the Child Protection Helpline. So if we look at local data around some of those stats, the place that I looked at for that was the recent study, Their Futures Matter data. And if you search Their Futures Matter Mid-North Coast Insights, what will come up is this, which is a summary of what they looked at in terms of vulnerability for different districts. So for us on the Mid-North Coast, probably the key thing to look at is that we're actually the 3rd highest in terms of children aged 0 to 5 in what they call their vulnerable group. So you can look at this later to say, well, what did they use to determine vulnerable groups? So they have that data there as well. But for us, it's actually 1 in 3 of our kids are considered vulnerable. So we're quite high in comparison to the rest of the state. And there's a snapshot for us as far as local areas. So Bellingen, you see 41% of kids are considered vulnerable. Kempsey, 48%. Nambucca, 45%. So we really want to be looking at, well, what's happening within in those areas, and what things can we actually change to make a difference for those kids. In terms of reports, I think it's 1 in 4 of our kids are known to community services. So in terms of vulnerability, Mid-North Coast, there's definitely a lot of work for us to do. And you can see with a lot of those different targets that it's not something that can be done by any health service or agency. It really has to be a coordinated effort across government and non-government organisations. So one of the other things for Mid-North Coast that's really important is to keep culture central, whether it's Aboriginal culture or culturally and linguistically diverse communities. There's a focus on bringing in, how do we make whatever we do here actually culturally appropriate? So we've worked in partnership with the First 1000 Days Australia, which is a brilliant resource if you are interested in having a look. So you can just Google First 1000 Days Australia, and you'll find the amazing work of Dr. Kerry Arabina, who's written some amazing joint work with different health districts and services. I would particularly recommend First 1000 Days Evidence Paper, Service Integration for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Early Childhood Development, and about regional initiatives as well. The First 1000 Days Australian Overview. So really central is that we understand that culture is a protective factor. So in addition to all of the other protective factors that we talk about, being proud of who you are, your history and your culture is a protective factor that mitigates toxic stress and builds resilience. We know that family is culture. So when we look at things like out-of-home care and what we would expect children to experience from out-of-home care, we see exactly what we would expect when children aren't with families safely. So making sure that we're broadening our understanding of what the role of family is, the importance of interpersonal interactions, that we're looking at an aspiration-focused initiative. So we're not looking at deficits, we're looking at, we actually have a lot to learn from Aboriginal people. As much as we need to educate people about the history and its continuing impacts, we also need to recognise the brilliant success and resilience of a population of people who have been disrupted by colonisation, and how they're still working within that resilience and that empowerment. Data sovereignty. So it's really important if we're talking about vulnerability, how are we creating narratives? When we view data through non-Indigenous perspectives, we decide what part of data is significant. So it's really important if, it's that principle, nothing about us without us, and giving power back to people who data is collected about. So the importance of genuine cultural consultation, co-design and co-creation and partnerships, and integrated place-based coordinated care through pregnancy to early childhood. So Liz Murphy talked a bit about our key goals within the health framework, and they're available via that website. I won't take you through them again, but really it's just that principle one, we all want to be speaking the same language. So we know if we're working with families and we see that they might be working with a number of agencies and this language is used here and that language is used there, criteria is different depending on where you go. How do we bring that together so we're streamlining services for families? Because we know as professionals that how it's very difficult to know who to go to, who to speak to, what to do to get into services. So are there ways that we can actually streamline that for families that we work with? That number two is that universal healthcare for everyone. And number three, clear pathways. When we identify that there's a risk there, what's the clear pathway across services and within services? So how can you support families that you work with? So key to this webinar today is really knowing that knowledge is power. So if you direct practice knowing, well, the first 2,000 days begin prior to birth. The fetus uses cues provided by mum's physical and mental states to predict the kind of world that he or she will be born in and adapts accordingly to that environment. So that really, really amazing ability to adapt to whatever environment that is, that happens prior to birth. So that adaptation can be either beneficial or detrimental depending on the child's relationships and environments. We know trauma is intergenerational. So generations can pass down disadvantage at a cellular level. Our biology changes in response to stress, poverty, and other prolonged adverse childhood experiences. And what happens in the first 2,000 days continue to impact on the duration of the lifespan. But safety is key. So when kids don't feel safe, calm, or protected, those children's brains place emphasis on developing those neuronal pathways that are associated with survival. So that fight or flight response, which is key. And that happens before learning and growth. So the brain is an amazing thing that it can adapt to focus on survival. But for kids, we're looking at, well, how do we make sure that they don't have to focus on that so they can focus on growing and being educated and good relationships? And so really important to remember, it's not all bad news. There's a lot we can do to support families in the first 2,000 days of life. So in addition to loving caregivers, children need safe communities, secure housing, access to green parklands, environments free from toxins, and access to affordable, nutritious foods. So it really is up to the whole community to make sure that kids get what they need to be healthy and thriving. Early intervention is crucial. There's a brilliant quote that I love, which is, at some point we need to stop fishing people out of the water and walk upstream and find out why they're falling in the first place. So instead of responding to symptoms and things which can't be, that there's that continued presentation to ED or that health issue, which we're not quite sure what it is, but actually maybe based in childhood trauma. So we know not all changes that occur within the first 2,000 days are permanent. However, as children grow, it becomes more difficult for them to compensate for negative experiences and environments that occurred in the early years. Early intervention to stop the risk or harm occurring means that we don't spend a lifetime managing those impacts. And as Liz Murphy talked about before, toxic stress. So mild controllable stress is good, but toxic stress is not. So we can see a bit of a graph here that shows that actually it's really good for kids to have mild, normal, temporary stress. So it teaches them to be resilient, it teaches them to cope. And so we want them to, to grapple with the world. And there's always those discussions about what's an acceptable level of risk for kids to be exposed to. So we want kids to learn their limits. We want them to, be able to navigate their environment, but in mild, normal and controllable stress. So when we're talking about toxic stress, it's that serious, prolonged, unsupported, and most importantly, unable to be controlled type of stress. It can disrupt healthy development and increase the risk of lifelong poor health outcomes. So I'll pop the Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris TED Talk in my links as well. So if you haven't seen it, it's definitely worth a watch. But she gives a great example, which is that if you're in a forest and you see a bear, your body releases stress hormones, adrenaline, cortisol, so you're ready to run or fight. And this is great if you're in a forest and there's a bear, but if there's no bear, but it's a little body responding to a stressful situation in the home on a daily basis, then it's quite harmful to the body's stress response system. And overactivity of that stress response system has all of those negative lifelong impacts. So when we see little bodies who come from homes where there are really stressful situations going on, and we see some issues associated with that, it's actually the body's very amazing but very normal way of adapting to an abnormal situation. But it does change the neural pathways in the brain, and these changes can stick. So how can you support in the work that you do with your families? Definitely access to high quality information. So when we hear people say that's the way it's always been done, or that's what my mum did and I turned out fine, we know that this space is complex. It's constantly changing, and we're a constantly changing society with COVID and all of the associated things that come with that. And it's impossible for us to know everything. So it's really important to build up relationships with your network and stay current, knowing when it's time to update knowledge with best practice and evidence-based research. And knowing who are your go-to people, who can you collaborate with? Where are the opportunities to provide education about the importance of the first 2,000 days? Collaboration is key. So we've just been talking about what kind of things we could do within the Child and Family Interagency, potentially to build a regional alliance, a regional first 2,000 days alliance, so that where there are gaps and overlaps, you have a group of people who are coming together to ensure that kids don't fall through those gaps, that there is a service that intervenes there. So it looks like cross-agency partnerships, relationships and initiatives, and looking at what's your role when you identify a gap or a barrier to a client accessing a service. So working holistically with the whole families. And again, it's really difficult for us as professionals to know who to talk to. So one of the most empowering things we can do for families is advocate to get the right people at the table so that we're working with a whole family issue. Strengths-based approaches that focus on child development. So research shows that parents engage with us much better when we talk about child development. So it might look like, is there anything that your child does that worries you or someone else? And then using that opportunity to talk about positive parenting strategies or what they can do to address the things that they might be worried about. Support parents to engage with services, particularly if they've had a valid previous negative experience. So we know that those negative experiences do happen, and there are legitimate reasons for people not wanting to engage with services. But in working closely with families, you do have the opportunity to advocate for them to access a service in a safe way, or advocate to the service for a different model of care or a different response. And there's going to be lots of opportunities to get involved in upcoming opportunities to redesign service delivery, as you'll see that all agencies are sitting in this same space. Oh. So I just put up this, I just went to a cultural immersion day recently, and I just thought this was magic. When we talk about equality and equity, we often see this comic that has two pictures. I think it's on Facebook, and you can see it wandering around and saying, well, this is the difference between equality and equity. And really the question is, well, what's the third option? So we need to be designing and delivering services that actually don't contribute or create equality or inequity in the first place. And that is a massive job. I don't say that lightly. It's actually a massive service redesign. People take time to change, so services take even longer. But it is this exciting space where the evidence is very clear and it can't be ignored. And we're all at this point to say, well, we need to change the way we do business. How do we change that? So how will it benefit your clients? So when we build our resilience, our shields become stronger, not only protecting us from the effects of stress, but buffering our children. So ultimately shielding them from adult issues and giving kids space to just be kids. So that's a quote from Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, and it shows there, kids, it's about sheltering them from adult issues. And when we build up parents' capacity to be parents, by building their resilience, we create that space for kids to just be kids. So what local supports are available? So you've got some great upcoming speakers in this webinar. You'll see talks about antenatal care, early breastfeeding, smoking in pregnancy, early parenting. So Tresillian, you'll get to meet Monica, who has, we're very lucky in the Mid-North Coast. We have the only regional Tresillian inpatient residential service. I shouldn't say inpatient, it's residential. But also it's an amazing service for families here on the Mid-North Coast, as we have outreach and the Tresillian bus. Immunisation, you'll hear about that. Addressing childhood obesity and some of the other amazing health promotions programs. So I'm just thinking, I'll show you our Mid-North Coast website. So if you're ever after information about Mid-North Coast services, probably the easiest way to look at it, Mid-North Coast website, you can either just look up maternity or child and family services. So you've got there, and you can see a list of all of those services. So whether it's Aboriginal maternal infant health services, there is information there about who they are and what they do, the referral process, and how to contact them. It might be audiometry. If you're in Kempsey, it might be building strong foundations, which is a culturally appropriate outreach service for Aboriginal children from birth to 5 years. So they're amazing in the work that they do. And if anything, First 2000 Days will say that we need to expand that service. Different counselling, child protection counselling, domestic and family violence prevention, early childhood immunisation, lots of different services that you can go through and have a look for different information and contacts there. There's also a healthy pregnancy service. So if you're working with women in pregnancy who want to know a bit more about services or supports that they can access. Just got a little bit of a video about who they are and what they do. So please let me know if the audio doesn't play.
Congratulations on your pregnancy. It's an exciting time, but it can be overwhelming. With so much information on eating and exercise in pregnancy, it's hard to know exactly where to start. We're here to help you start a healthy conversation that's all about you. Get Healthy in Pregnancy is a free telephone health coaching program that gives you one-on-one support with your own personal health coach. Your health coach will help you to gain a healthy amount of weight during your pregnancy, making it easier for you to return to fitness after your baby is born. There are many benefits to eating well and staying active during pregnancy, such as better sleep, more energy, less risk of lower back pain or feeling stressed, and even an easier labour. With the support from your Get Healthy in Pregnancy health coach, staying active and eating well has never been easier. Your coach will call you at times that are convenient for you. Through regular phone calls, your coach will help you stay motivated and on track with your health goals. We've even got a handy information pack to guide you. Best of all, the program is free and it only takes 2 minutes to sign up. Simply ask your midwife or GP, visit our website or give us a call to speak to your Get Healthy in Pregnancy health coach. It's the easy way to start a healthy discussion about weight gain, staying active and eating well during pregnancy.
So great great resource for parents in pregnancy. And the other one I was just going to show was the, if you head to, is it Mid-North Coast or is it, yeah. I'll just start a new one. So when you're hitting your services and you hit maternity, you can also see a range of services that are there to support parents in pregnancy. So we're constantly updating these web pages with videos that you can show parents and information about what do you do now, different things that will happen for parents. And it's really good to stay up to date yourself as things change as well. Lots of resources there in pregnancy. So childhood development, you'll hear a bit about child development through the talks, the upcoming talks, but some great resources if you're wanting to update your own knowledge, is heading into the child and health development. So that's through Kids and Families, Maternal Child Family Health, or you can always just hit that search box to say Child and Family Health. There's a video that you can watch with parents, which is really helpful for them to get a bit of an overview. But also what's really helpful is an understanding of what's in their blue book. I mean, if you're a parent, you might have some knowledge about this, but it's always good to be able to sort of know what stages that kids are up to and what you should be concerned about. So when is it time to get in to see a GP or talk to a child and family health nurse about the concerns that they or a family might be having? So Learn the Signs Act Early is all about that, looking at, well, what age is this child? What should they be doing? And what might I be concerned about? So you can access lots of resources there, including the parent brochure, which is something that you can give out to parents. So English there, but also available in lots of different languages as well. So the Milestones Matter or Learn the Signs Act Early looks a bit like this. And I would encourage you just to have it on hand if you have questions or concerns about child development in families that you're working with. So there it is there, but it's got a little poster, which is very simplistic, but it gives you something to be able to talk to parents about as whether they're at that stage or not. So you can see the apps are on that same page, which are the down here, Deadly Tots app, and also Love, Talk, Sing, Read, Play. So different things to build up that parent-child interactions, different ideas in how to get those interactions happening. Because for some parents who might not have had great examples of parenting, for parents who might have been in out-of-home care themselves, we can tell people what they need to be doing, but actually showing them what that looks like is really important also. And I've just popped up there some support databases for anyone who doesn't know, but these is probably, everyone in this room is probably situated within these services or knows about these services. But if you don't know, Blue Sky has a great find a service website, which you can pop in your location and the concern that you might have and search for listings for services to see which one's appropriate for the family that you're working with. Raisingchildren.net is also a website that is supported by New South Wales Health. It's up-to-date information about raising children of all ages. So if you're not signed up for their regular mail out, or I would definitely recommend it. And I guess the one thing that I hadn't put in there, but I just wanted to cover off was so Brighter Beginnings, as I said, there's a lot of information there that you can access at a later date. Another great resource is this evidence review down here. And it has all of the information that we've talked about here today to talk about why early investment is key, but also how to make a difference. So when we're looking at what can we do across the first 2,000 days and why it's important. So you can see there, pregnancy, what's important in pregnancy, antenatal care, socio-emotional health checks, smoking cessation programs, sustained health home visiting, continuity of midwifery care model, through to different ages. So really just important to look at how can we work together. And we definitely talked about with the Child and Family Interagency and the different services, potentially looking at whether it's a regional alliance or coming together to understand where are the gaps and the overlaps, how do we support parents with the knowledge that we have, access to good quality information, and sort of working together in different collaborative ways. So there you guys have it, a bit of an overview of the first 2,000 days. Very open to suggestions about if there's things that I didn't include and you thought, well, this is really important for us to know, or this is an idea for us to do something in the future as part of an interagency group. As we all work together and sort of look at, well, how do we redesign our services so they're integrated and people can access them, and those barriers that have always been there, how do we remove those barriers when we know we all come from different organisations but we're working with the same families? So I guess I'll open it up at this stage to say, is there any questions or comments